We have a very special keynote address on the future of leadership, and I'm pleased to introduce Zabeen Hirji, Executive Advisor for the Future of Work at Deloitte Canada. The pandemic has changed the way we live and work, and leadership has become more human, compassionate, transparent, inclusive, collaborative, and even vulnerable. Leadership is at an inflection point. With much more to say on this topic, I'm happy to introduce Zabeen to close out today's event.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and maybe you can take the slide down. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and going last at a full afternoon packed with lots of great messages and reflections. On the one hand, can be harder. On the other hand, in some ways, I think what you'll find is a lot of what we've talked about is going to be blended into my conversation with you. So one of the things that's come through really clearly is that the pandemic has really been this time machine to the future of work, to the future of leadership. And if I were to capture it in a single word, I would simply say that the future of leadership is human. So for me, the real question then, in terms of what we're seeing now, is this a leadership moment or is this a movement? And the answer is up to us. Yes, each one of us plays a part because, I'm reminded here that leadership is not a title, it's actions, it's behavior. And that brings me back to the fact that the answer is really up to us. As I look back over the last year, we've learned a lot about leadership. Without question, and we heard it throughout this afternoon, something fundamental has changed, and much of it for the better. New mindsets, new behaviors have emerged. And the question really is, how will we embed these into our personal leadership as well as into the DNA of our organizations? One of the things that I've really been heartened by is how business, government, educators, not-for-profit, civil society have come together, have torn down some of the traditional silos to unite, to save lives, to save livelihoods. And one of the things I truly hope is that we don't let those silos build up again, because big issues, big problems can only be solved by all of us working together. So what have we discovered about leadership? We've discovered that empathy, compassion, vulnerability, transparency, they truly create resilient individuals and organizations. Leaders have put people first. As Vala said, leaders are putting culture first. They're building these deeper connections through empathy, through compassion, through authenticity, and yes, even vulnerability. We're learning that it's okay to not be okay. And I know that being vulnerable is hard. It's really hard. It takes us outside our comfort zones. But it works. And I speak from experience on both counts. As some of you know, I have a long leadership experience at RBC and retired about 3 years ago, where I was the CHRO. And as I thought back about vulnerability, one of the things that came to mind was that during my career, I felt safe at certain times being vulnerable, sharing my fears with my boss, with my peers, and with my team. And while it was really hard to just take that step, what I found is that it deepened the trust and took our relationships to a whole new level. And really at the core, it connected us as humans because we all experience those kinds of emotions. Leaders are being transparent. They're sharing information real time, even when they don't have all the answers. In fact, maybe even more so when we don't have all the answers. And we've entered this era of radical transparency, and there is no going back. Leaders are listening to learn, suspending judgment, and this new way of connecting is building trust. Many of you have spoken about trust throughout your conversations. As employees feel safer to speak up, they're coming up with creative and practical ideas and solutions. I recall very early on in the pandemic, a grocery executive saying to me, you know something, we have been getting our ideas, our creativity from our frontline staff in the stores who are helping us serve our customers and take care of our employees during this pandemic. And that came as a bit of a surprise to me. And he went on to, not the fact that the ideas were coming from there, but that was a discovery. And he went on to say, we just were not harnessing this talent. And we were also missing out on opportunities to create more meaningful jobs. And of course, like many of you, we're responding to, I love seeing that real person as opposed to a corporate persona. My manager's giving me the flexibility. I can be me. The masks are off. So this notion of being human, sometimes people see it as it's the soft stuff, but really the soft stuff is the hard stuff. When we connect at that level, when we support people at that level, it enables them to be their best. And after all, isn't that what leadership is truly about? I had one organization share something that they're doing that I think is quite bold and dramatic in some respects around how they're showing empathy. They've looked at their performance review process, and they've recognized that there are some people that are struggling more in this environment. Dave spoke earlier about his children who have young school-age kids, and that's really hard to be working on your job, to be caring for kids, and to be homeschooling. And what some organizations have done is they've adjusted the performance goals for individuals during this time that are really struggling to juggle all of that. And ultimately, that's going to bring their best to work. And those are the kinds of bold measures when we talk about empathy and compassion. There's some things that are easier to do, but it's not just about doing what's easy, but also what's doing right. Let's we talk a little bit now about one of the other bubbles that you see there, which is mental health. Some of you have also touched on that. And this notion of mental health and well-being is really becoming a touchstone of leadership. As we know, mental health was already a growing concern pre-pandemic. 1 in 5 Canadians experienced a mental health illness. In 2019, Deloitte released a report called the ROI in Workplace Mental Health Programs, and they estimated the cost to organizations to be $50 billion. So supporting well-being programs is not just the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. And we know that the pandemic has exacerbated this. According to the Morneau-Shapell Mental Health Index, the level of mental health in February indicated that the working population is currently as distressed as the most distressed 1% of working Canadians prior to 2020. This is a staggering statistic. Let's just pause to think about that. So this is not about somebody else. This is about all of us. It's about you. It's about me. It's about the people we care for. And it's an urgent issue that needs bold actions. Grief, anxiety, isolation, illness, job loss, financial concerns. You know the list just as well as I do. And we're tired. While we are, as we recognize, privileged to be able to work from home, even those working from home are tired. This is hard. And I'm really glad to see organizations responding. This is not going to go away post-pandemic. The impacts will linger for quite some time. We've seen that from previous crises. CHROs I speak to regularly are concerned, and I'm certainly sensing a greater sense of concern over the last 2 or 3 months. And so taking action in that space is really important as individual leaders. It's everything from having those one-on-one conversations to really try to understand how people are really feeling. And that kind of trust and honesty comes through the quality of relationship that we're able to build for people to feel safe to speak up. And that's how you can then support them, because it's not a one size fits all. Leaders are sharing their stories, which is really encouraging, because it starts to normalize mental health. Mental health is health. And my personal mama bear message to you is, please practice self-care. It's not a luxury, it's essential. And build in those micro steps. We heard quite a few today, the walks, the midday walks. Turn your commute time into leaving your home, going for a walk and coming back, so you make that transition. There are a lot of things that can be built in, and this is essential. Let me now turn to another key theme that you see here around humanity and leadership that's human, and that's building Jedi. Now, for you Star Wars fans, you know that the Jedi were seen as guardians of peace and justice. And I'm talking about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. COVID has illuminated the longstanding issues of systemic racism and inequities towards Black people, Indigenous peoples, and people of color. We know that Canada is a wonderful country to live in, but unfortunately, that experience isn't shared by everyone, and that can't continue. I want to quote here Wisdom Teddy, who's the principal of the University of Toronto, Scarborough campus. And here's what he said: those on the margins of our community deserve equity as a right. They should not be given the burden of seeking it, nor be made to feel that they can get it as a privilege from the generosity of those who have the power to give it, and hence the power to take it back. Those are pretty powerful words. And words matter. And one thing that I would call out here is a step that I think many of us can take, which is to replace the term equity deserving with equity seeking to equity deserving. Because this is everybody's role to really create that kind of equity and inclusion. Now, I certainly remain cautiously optimistic about the future, or as someone said earlier, realistically optimistic about the future, but we can't lose momentum. And these are things that as HR leaders, we can play a huge role in. So what are some things that can be done? One deputy minister said to me, Zabeen, we simply won't reach our potential as individuals, as an organization, and as citizens unless we are truly diverse and inclusive. Canada's already 22% of our population are visible minorities, and that's projected to grow to over 30% by 2031. So what can we do? What are some specific actions that we can take to build a more inclusive organization and a more inclusive culture? I'm a strong believer in goals. We set ambitious goals for everything that matters. Why is diversity any different? We need to be bold. We need to be bolder, just as we are on other important issues. And we need to speak out to influence others. We need more leaders to visibly lead these efforts, both internally and externally. And at a very personal level, if we see something, we need to say something. There is no such thing as an innocent bystander. And I have a daughter in her mid-20s who was just saying to me recently that she was on a subway platform, and there were two East Asian women who somebody was making racist comments to them. And she didn't feel safe enough to say something to the person who was doing it. But what she did is she walked over to the two women, and she expressed empathy. She expressed compassion. She said how sorry she was to see what they had to go through and how are they feeling. So there are different ways for us to do that and to speak up and to say something when we see something that's wrong. And the other point I would really punctuate here that we're not seeing enough of, we see quite a bit of mentoring happening, and that's important. But we need to see more influential sponsors, people who really identify talent from underrepresented groups and say, you know what, I know what this person's capable of. That's exactly what happened in my career. I had 3 remarkable sponsors throughout my career who are people who said, I know Zabeen has the capabilities to do that job. I know that has the potential and that she will rise to the occasion. So they stood behind me. And that was, without that kind of sponsorship, I think my outcomes might have been different. And I will point out that my sponsors, 2 of my sponsors were men, white men, and one of them was a woman. So this really brings me to the conclusion around the humanity of leadership. I hope that it's given you a few things to reflect on, to think about in terms of what you can do as individuals, as well as what you can do as leaders, as HR leaders in your organizations to build leadership that's more human. So I'm going to leave you with some reflections and quotes from people who continue to inspire me. To start off with, to quote Gandhi, who said, to be the change you want to see in the world. And Meryl Streep, who said, the great gift of human beings is that we have the power of empathy, the power of empathy. Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. And we know that through the pandemic, that has been paramount, and that's Brene Brown. Being authentic is never perfect, always genuine. Be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Oscar Wilde. And one of my favorites, Jacinda Ardern, you can be strong and compassionate. I also talked about mental health is health. Diversity is a fact. Inclusion is an act. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. These have been our superpowers during the pandemic. How do we turn this leadership moment into a movement? It's in our hands. Let's ask ourselves, what role do I want to play in this leadership movement? Leadership is not simply a title, it's action, it's behavior. This is such a fabulous time to be in HR, where there's so many opportunities for you to have impact on people, on your organizations, on your economies, on your societies. It's really a once in a lifetime opportunity to lead with both head and heart, to inspire and to help build leaders to create a better future, one that is more human, more inclusive, and that works for all. If not now, then when? If not you, then who? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zabeen. What a wonderful way to close out this discussion with reminders of leading with empathy, ensuring employees take care of their mental and physical health, and pursuing true inclusion and diversity. For me, that's human leadership in a nutshell.